But I can't separate the 26th of January from the fact that my brothers are more likely to go to jail than they are to go to school, or that my little sisters and my mum are more likely to be beaten and raped than anyone else's sisters or mum.
Well, it's official. I have the body of a 73-year-old. Rudy did a fitness test not that long ago, and his personal trainer, doctor, told him that he is fit and healthy for a man of his age, and he has to keep doing what he's doing. I am going to follow in the footsteps of the great man. Cheers, young fella. Why do I have the body of a 73-year-old? I could spend a whole episode dedicated to that, but that would mean that you would be subjected to semi-naked pictures of me, and that would give YouTube another reason to censor me and demonetize me. The good news, however, is the preparation for India in April for our trek from Jaisalmer in the north to Koshi in the south, traversing approximately 3,500 kilometres is on track in one of these. So I better get my age back down to 58. Anywho, on January 26, 1788, the first fleet of the British ships arrived at Port Jackson, New South Wales. On the anniversary of this event every year, we get a public holiday to celebrate the country's National Day. But there are calls to change the date of Australia Day to make it a celebration that is more inclusive of the people who lived here before those ships arrived. For Indigenous Australians, the historic date of January 26 was the day when their land was no longer only theirs, and in the years since there have been several calls to stop making the day with celebration, but with mourning and protest. With the raising of the British flag and claiming of Australia, January 26, 1788, 231 years ago, some Indigenous folk and a whole bunch of lefty social justice warriors have said it is the day that the first Australians lost their Australia they knew. You see, this is how the media would want us to remember this day, saying the swift colonisation of this country was brutal. Land was stolen. Many Indigenous Australians were killed in mass genocide, allegedly, and generations of children were stolen from their families. Stolen? The small number of Aboriginal child removals in the 20th century were almost all based on traditional grounds of child welfare. It wasn't for racist reasons. Government officers and religious missionaries wanted to rescue children from welfare camps and shanty settlements riddled with alcoholism, domestic violence and sexual abuse. The evidence shows public servants, doctors, police and missionaries were appalled to find Aboriginal girls between 5 and 8 years of age suffering from sexual abuse and venereal disease. They were dismayed to sometimes find the girls of 9 and 10 years were hired as prostitutes by their own parents. That is why the great majority of children removed by authorities were female. And for all that, based on fact, Australia still took the moral high ground, stood up and said, I'm sorry. If we shift Australia Day, the public holiday, the celebration of Australia as we know it and love it, to another date that isn't tied to the suffering of Indigenous peoples, would everyone benefit as a bunch of social justice warriors want it? They say it's simple. It doesn't hurt anyone to change the date, but it causes much anguish for Indigenous Australians if it is left as it is. Do you really think changing the date to, I don't know, the 4th of February, the 20th of January, or let's just say the 25th of December would make any difference? Would the pain and suffering simply vanish? Would Indigenous communities wake up on the new day and say, hey, things around here have got to change. We now have our date change, so let's work together and unite as a nation to make Australia the greatest country in the world. Not a hope in hell. Shifting the day has zero significance. We will still have a public holiday, we will still have our thong throwing contest and cane toad racing, and we will still have horrible incidents of child neglect, substance abuse, and tribal community conflict. Nothing changes. It's a day for all Australians, no matter where our personal stories began, to reflect on being Australian, celebrate contemporary Australia and recognise our history. Many of us Aussies traditionally celebrate it with a barbecue, and for thousands of people each year, almost 13,000 last year in 2018, it's the day they officially became Australian citizens. Now, G-Mann's not going to get caught up in the race debate. I simply like to present the facts that many Australians are not even aware of. History lesson. January 26th was not the day the First Fleet landed in Australia. In fact, it was a whole week before. It was sometime between the 18th and 20th of January 1788. Men of the First Fleet had already set ashore at Sydney's Botany Bay, but on finding it was unsuitable, they relocated further north to Sydney Cove, a small bay in the now iconic Sydney Harbour. The 26th actually marks the raising of the Union Jack in Sydney Cove and the official declaration of British sovereignty on the land that would become Australia. Who are these lefty SJWs? Well, for people who are avid tennis enthusiasts, you may recall an Australian tennis player by the name of Pat Cash, who has become a campaigner for Aboriginal rights. And he said, "I'm the first one to put my hand up and say I was completely ignorant about what was going on, and I feel embarrassed about it, and I want to learn." What are you embarrassed about? Did you do something to hurt or harm the Indigenous people in any way? Was it your parents? Was it their parents? Was it their parents? I mean, how far back do you want to go? I mean, come on, brother. Even our former Prime Minister, Kevin Rudd, said in a powerful speech, "Mr. Speaker, I move that today we honour the Indigenous peoples of this land, the oldest continuing cultures in human history. We reflect on their past mistreatment. We reflect, in particular, on the mistreatment of those who were stolen generations, this blemished chapter in our nation's history." He goes on to say, "For the pain and suffering and the hurt of these stolen generations, their descendants, and for their families left behind, we say sorry. To the mothers and the fathers, the brothers and the sisters, for the breaking up of families and communities, we say sorry. And for the indignity and degradation thus inflicted on a proud people and a proud culture, we say sorry." We said sorry. That clearly isn't enough. So Pat Cash flew to Alice Springs for a day and sat with the elders, but I'm not too sure for what purpose, to ask if they all wanted the date changed. He got all emotional as one local described how in her whole life she has never lived with electricity.
Never had electricity.
So in your 29 years you've never lived with electricity?
No.
I mean,
How do you feel when you hear about that, Pat?
it's horrible. I mean, it really is horrible.
Right then, change the date, because that's going to bring back power and water. I bet he flew back to his luxurious home, which by the way isn't even in Australia, and says to himself, "Seeing firsthand the struggles of this community, I'm going to call for Australia Day to be changed from January 26th. What are you so offended about? Seriously, brother, it was 231 years ago. And how's this? He said,
It's mind-boggling, the idiot that came up with that date, just to think that we should be celebrating that. Let's celebrate any other date.
Pat, that idiot and those idiots before that idiot gave you a great opportunity to play for the country where your ancestors also suffered. It's called Australia." He ended up by saying, "For you haters out there, I'm not stopping until these people get the justice for what they deserve." These people. So that is how you refer to the traditional owners of the land. Thank you, linesman. Thank you, ball boys. Some of you may know, not all, but in my real job, I frequently travel to the communities like ANYHOOOO, Cowan, Thursday Island, Mornington Island, and many other Indigenous communities where the population is only around 900 to 1,500. Pat, for your info, I speak to them regularly, and I can tell you that the date change is the last thing on their mind. I can tell you that there are definitely things that they would love to have access to, but I can sure as hell tell you what they don't want is some overzealous do-gooders getting all emotional and crying and not doing a damn thing about it. Then you have this woman, Brooke Bonney, who is a proud Indigenous woman as one of the new Today Show hosts. Look at this lineup of lefties. It's looking more and more like The View every day. She has used her massive public platform on The Breakfast Show to back the push to change the date that we celebrate Australia Day. Take a listen to this. I'll comment. Go ahead.
This date, I know it comes up every year, and I'm not trying to tell anyone else what they should be doing or how they should be celebrating, but I feel like I have almost more reason than anyone else to love this country as much as I do, because I'm the oldest of 6 kids, single mum, and I get to sit here on the Today Show and talk to you guys about this. I get to travel around the world with the Prime Minister and ask him questions about our issues. This is the best country in the world, no doubt. But I can't separate the 26th of January from the fact that my brothers are more likely to go to jail than they are to go to school, or that my little sisters and my mum are more likely to be beaten and raped than anyone else's sisters or mum.
But I can't separate the 26th of January from the fact that my brothers are more likely to go to jail than they are to go to school, or that my little sisters and my mum are more likely to be beaten and raped than anyone else's sisters or mum. So riddle me this, Brooke. Have the Boney brothers made a decision in life to break the law and be repeat offenders in jail, causing dreadful heartache to their family? And why the hell are your sisters and mum more likely to be beaten up? What is it? They won't leave their partners in peace while they're trying to earn money playing Fortnite? See what I did there? Or did the First Fleet make them do it from 231 years ago? Victimology has now reached a new absurd high.
And that started from that day. So for me, it's a difficult day and I don't want to celebrate it. But any other day of the year, I'll tie an Australian flag around my neck and I'll run through the streets with anyone else.
But why should any other day be different than the January 26th?
Because that's the first day, that's the day that it changed for us, you know? That's the sort of the beginning of what some people would say is the end. That's the turning point.
If we are the best country in the world, no doubt, it's common sense to celebrate the day on which Western civilization arrived here, with the advanced technologies, rule of law, education, healthcare, civilized institutions, etc., that have made us great. Now let's hear from a ground roots Indigenous woman, Jacinta Price. Please stick around for the 3 minutes.
What I'm seeing is political divisiveness coming from a minority group of people who claim to be offended because of what took place in 1788. And because of this claim of offence, it is now pushed upon the rest of the Australian people to accept that because they're offended, that we should simply change the date. And for me personally, it's actually removing from why we actually celebrate Australia Day. We don't celebrate it because of genocide like people claim. We don't celebrate it because Aboriginal people have suffered over 200 years' time. No, we celebrate Australia Day for the country that we are and the country that we have all worked together to create right now. And there's more than just Indigenous people and white people in this country. There are people from many different backgrounds, and I feel that is one of our strengths.
When you say some people claim to be offended, do you accept that some people are genuinely offended about the date and what for them it stands for, or do you think those claims of offence are being faked in some way?
Well, it's a choice. It's a choice to be offended. I don't think people feel pain as a result of this. I think the people that are living pain and crisis are living it silently in remote communities of Australia, and they're being completely disregarded, and their issues are being placed to the side because other people who have claimed offence and claimed pain are experiencing such pain. Now, it's an emotion that they're claiming to feel. Now, if people feel angry, do we encourage people to act on that impulse of anger? If people have anger management issues, we tell them to get help to deal with that particular emotion because it's their responsibility. It's not the rest of us. It's not for the rest of us to change in order to suit that person's emotion. I just like to see us grow up as a country a little bit and be more responsible in that regard, responsible for our own feelings, responsible to also act forgivingly toward the rest of non-Indigenous Australia, considering they weren't actually responsible for what happened to Aboriginal people in 1788. If it was in fact impacting on Aboriginal people's lives in such a way that it would save a life, a single life, then yeah, I'd say change the date. But otherwise, let's be adults and let's look at how we can, yes, recognise our country's history in all of its complexity and entirety, and let's be grown up enough to go, well, we have to forgive at some point, because we've had sorry. We now want people to change the date. If we change the date, there will be another demand, and that's the reality of it, because once these particular issues gather momentum, well then it's just gone beyond ridiculous in that we're just pandering to people because they feel offended.
For the life of me, I don't see why white people in Australia don't see the 26th of January as a traumatic day for their ancestors as well. The First Fleet arrival wasn't a walk in the park. It was a triumph for no one. Oh, except maybe the British government, who were looking for somewhere to store their impoverished people who had fallen victim to economic displacement during the Industrial Revolution. These First Fleet convicts were starved to death, raped, beaten and tortured. These were people forced from their homes to work as slave labour in another country. It completely baffles me. I mean, we have songs about this, poems. We visited prisons in school, and we even learnt about how these people were tied down and flogged, even though they had only stolen a loaf of bread. My ancestors, of course, are not these people, but they are family to so many in Australia. I think when our experiences are so varied, it can be so hard to empathise with each other. But we can at least try to take in our history and see that the British colonisation for what it was, fuelled by genocide of an entire population and built on the backs of the vulnerable. I've never understood why this date is such a beast, even from the ignorant white minority perspectives. I'd love to know your thoughts, and as usual, like, share, comment, subscribe, unsubscribe, do what you gotta do. Now go away and cheers to Rudy. Double shot. I'm Gerald Pauschmann for The Point TV.